Saint Christophoros of Arbouna, or Papulakos, Part 2. While Katerina, eager to exploit the crisis, proclaimed Fotini's illness as a sign of divine punishment, to prevent the desperate woman from crawling to the village spring to quench her thirst, since no one dared to enter her house, while Katerina persuaded 5 or 6 like-minded women to join her. Under the night sky, they conspired to nail Fotini's door shut, ensuring she could not infect the rest of the village. To further justify this egregious act, Katerina claimed that the Virgin Mary had appeared to her in a dream, commanding her to protect the village by carrying out this very deed that same night. Most villagers did not agree with this cruel act, but neither did they dare approach the sick woman's house, paralyzed by their fear of the infectious disease. While Katerina deliberately chose that night, fully aware that the only 2 men who could stop her, Father Nifon and Christophanagos, were out of town. With both men absent, she felt emboldened and free to act as the self-appointed leader of the pack. The existential fear that Fotini's illness might indeed be the plague, combined with a spiritual dread that the village was committing a grave sin by allowing vile Katerina to torment a dying woman, left the villagers restless and anxious. That night, no adult could find peace or shut their eyes to sleep. After midnight, the villagers' unease intensified when they heard the sound of hurried footsteps approaching Fotini's home, followed by that of a hammer prying the nails from her front door. No one dared to step outside their homes, but some women were heard sighing deeply and quietly, weeping over the recent events that had transpired. Within minutes, the hammering ceased. As the villagers held their breath, they heard Fotini's frail voice break the silence. "I'm thirsty, so very thirsty. Please, my fellow Christians, just a little water," she pleaded. Suddenly, someone dashed out of her house and ran toward the village spring. Moments later, they returned with the precious water Fotini has been longing for, finally allowing her to wet her parched lips after 2 agonizing days. After that, everything fell silent, as not a single leaf stirred on the branches. At the break of dawn, and as the birds began to welcome the new day with their melodious songs, a shadow slipped quietly out of Fotini's hut and slowly disappeared into the morning light. By the time the sun rose to its highest point in the sky, the villagers had gathered a short distance from Fotini's house, their eyes fixed on the open door, whispering anxiously among themselves. They were deeply curious to uncover what had happened, yet the lingering suspicion that the plague had caused Fotini's death kept them at a cautious distance. The door and 2 windows of the humble hut stood wide open, revealing a main room that was tidy and orderly. At its center, Fotini's body lay on a mattress, solemn and still. 2 large candles flickered softly, one positioned near her head and the other at her feet. Fotini lay lifeless, dressed in her wedding gown, with a small icon of Christ resting gently on her crossed arms. Everyone was eager to discover who had been by her side on the final night of her life, yet no one dared to ask. Their eyes lingered instead on her pale, gaunt face, a dismal reflection of her suffering. At that moment, a man emerged from the crowd and made his way toward the steps of Fotini's house. He was short, solidly built, with a sturdy physique and a sparse, scruffy beard. With his gaze fixed on the ground, he walked steadily toward the steps of Fotini's house. There he paused, made the sign of the cross, and then stepped inside. A loud murmur rippled through the crowd, and someone was heard exclaiming, "Has Christophanagos lost his mind?" No one spoke another word, their eyes fixed on the house, dumbfounded. Christophanagos, a man of few words, polite and calm, lived with his 3 brothers in a modest home. They raised livestock and butchered animals for the people in the surrounding villages. Though this trade was profitable and brought Christopanagos financial success, deep down it was not a path he truly desired. It was for this reason, both on his days off and after work, he found solace in reading the lives of the saints, as well as lighting vigil lamps in country chapels and old abandoned churches. He had a deep passion for chanting and often admitted that his greatest desire was to be tonsured a reader. However, his struggle with reading kept him from pursuing this dream, and so he quietly set it aside. Christopanagos entered their house and prayed quietly before Fotini's body. Afterward, he stepped onto the porch, crossed his arms, and gazed silently at the stunned crowd. Finally, with certainty and stunning simplicity, he addressed them as follows. Fotini, the wife of Stavros, has died. Someone go and fetch Father Nifon, and let us all give her a proper burial, as we would for any Christian, Christopanagos said firmly. This woman does not deserve to be called a Christian, Val Caterina shouted, her voice cutting through the air as she stood on higher ground behind the crowd. Christopanagos remained silent and began to walk steadily toward the crowd. Uneasy, they stepped backward, putting distance between themselves and him. Yet he continued advancing, his calm demeanor unshaken. Slowly, the crowd retreated until they found themselves gathered in the main plaza of the village, pressed against the exterior wall of the church's altar. As he continued walking toward them, in a panic to protect themselves from potential contagion, the crowd rushed into the church, gathering under the iconostasis for shelter. Christopanagos followed them into the church, maintaining his steady pace. He went to the iconostasi, prostrated himself, then stood by the right chanter's stand and called out, "Here before God and the Theotokos, I adjure you to expel this demonic fear and your evil thoughts," he exclaimed with authority. "It seems this unwarranted fear has made you forget your godly duty toward one of our Christian sisters who has passed. Have we forgotten that we too will one day die? You are insulting us, Christopanagos," Val Caterina shouted once more. "If you make her a Christian, then what are we? What is the honor of being a Christian?" This time, Christopanagos could no longer contain his anger and raised his voice. "Caterina, this is the second time you speak without understanding what you're saying. Neither you, nor I, nor any of us have the right to judge who's a Christian and who isn't. This right belongs only to the one who was crucified for our sins." Christopanagos continued on, his voice firm. "The only thing we should be concerned with is our own deeds and forgiving our fellow men. And now the Lord's mandate is to forgive Fotini and give her a proper burial." Val Caterina, however, refused to relent. Being infected with a disease, she will contaminate everyone who enters her home or touches her corpse, and in a few days we will all follow her to the grave, Val Caterina shouted. "That's why it is best to burn her in her house and not bury her. We will die when and if it's the will of God," Christopanagos responded calmly. "He who believes in God will not be lost, but the one who does not believe will not fare well in this life, and the doors of paradise will be shut to him in the life to come. I am appealing to the men standing here," Christopanagos called out. "We are men and Christians. Come with me. Let us go and get Father Nifon and lift the casket. The longer we delay, our deed will lose all its value." 2 young teenagers, Nicholas Tsopotos and John Mermingas, stepped out from the crowd and walked toward Christopanagos. "Let's go, Christopanagos," they said. "We will help you carry the body of the departed." Seeing that Christopanagos was gaining support, Val Caterina shouted even louder, "What do you need us for? You who enjoyed her body while feeding her all these months, go and bury her yourself." The terrible slender made Christopanagos' blood rush to his head, his vision growing blurry. "The enjoyment you speak of may you also have in your life, and no more," he replied through clenched teeth. His body trembling, he stormed out of the church, the two young men following closely behind him as he made his way straight to Father Nifon's house. "Father," Christophoros said, his voice steady but urgent, "Father, Fotini, Stavros' wife, has died. Please come with us to read the prayers for the dead and chant the funeral service. These young men and I will carry her." The priest hesitated for a moment, and fearing that Fotini's death might have been caused by the plague, pretended to be ill. "You know, I've been traveling for the last 3 days and I don't feel well," the priest said, his voice strained. "I think I'm running a fever, and I was planning to rest at home today." "The Lord on high, who knows the truth of every one of our words, will make you well and grant you the strength to help this Christian woman who has died," Christophoros said. "My only concern is," Father Nifon added, "that tomorrow is Sunday, and many of the Christians who have been too afraid to step into the church for the last 3 weeks may become even more fearful of receiving Holy Communion from a priest who has been in such close proximity to the sick woman. If our faith is so weak, Father Nifon, that we believe that God lacks the power to protect us, then Holy Communion and Antidoron are utterly useless to us," Christophoros replied. Father Nifon, though a good priest with a kind heart, was perhaps feeling some apprehension. Yet more than anything, he wanted to test Christophoros' resolve. After a few moments of silence, he finally said, "What are we waiting for? Let's go." The four of them began walking toward Fotini's house, and many of the villagers followed at a distance of about 50 yards. They stopped and stood back as the four men entered the house. A few minutes later, the priest emerged, and the 3 other men were carrying Fotini's body to her final resting place, just beyond the boundaries of the village. The villagers followed at what they considered a safe distance, quietly attending the funeral service. They watched from afar as the burial took place, and then saw the 4 men leave together, each heading in separate directions toward their homes. Christophoros returned home and spent some quiet time in his room, reflecting in solitude. Meanwhile, Valkaterina went from door to door, spreading rumors and burying Christophoros alive with her bizarre and strange claims. Among other things, she was prophesying that the village would pay a heavy price for not stopping Christophoros and for ignoring her warnings. Christophoros remained inside his house until sundown. When his brothers returned home after dark, they appeared less than thrilled with their brother's actions. "Why must you get involved in other people's affairs?" his brothers grumbled. "This place has a priest and a mayor and a parish council board, and yet, instead of letting them handle the funeral, you took it upon yourself to play undertaker." "What harm did I do?" Christophoros asked. "You turned the entire village upside down," his brothers responded sharply. "You incited Valkaterina's vicious tongue, and now she's tearing you to pieces. She's going door to door calling you Fotini's lover," his brothers continued. "She's claiming that you were the one feeding her since last August, and that's why you were so determined to stay by her side in her final moments, even endangering the entire village in the process. What is this mess you've gotten us into?" his brothers exclaimed. "Every tongue is gossiping about you, and they all look at us with disdain, glancing at us with half an eye." Christophoros remained silent, allowing his brothers to vent their frustration. Once they had finished and retired to their rooms, he quietly opened the door and left into the dark of the night. He went straight to the cemetery, knelt beside Fotini's freshly dug grave, and prayed. Afterward, with a heavy heart, he slowly walked back toward the village. He walked slowly and quietly, carefully not to wake the dogs. As he approached Valkaterina Street, he stood before her door, considered knocking, but when he heard her dog stir, he hesitated. Katerina was awake as well, and her curiosity led her to peek through the window. The sight of Christophoros standing there in the dark of the night nearly demonized her. "What are you doing at my house at this hour, you thrice-cursed scoundrel?" she yelled. Damn you! You better run before I wake up the entire village. Or did you think old ladies' doors are open for you at night, like Fotinis was? Listen to me, Katerina, Christophoros said calmly. I came here for one reason, and one reason only. This morning, your words made me very angry, and I ended up cursing you. I repent for this, and I came here to ask for your forgiveness. These ploys and god mockeries of yours won't work here. Try peddling them elsewhere. Val Katerina howled. You're scared, and you came here to make me change my mind with your sweet talk. But I vowed to pay you back before I breathe my last, you dirty dog. Now get the hell out of here. Christophoros lowered his head, heavy-hearted, and took the path to the village church. When he arrived, he found the door locked. Across the street was the church sexton, Aunt Kelly, who had a key, but Christophoros chose not to wake her. Even if he managed to rouse her from bed, there was no guarantee she would open the door for him before daybreak. Besides, he had already provided enough fuel for the village's gossip, and he didn't want to add to it by involving Aunt Kelly, whose mouth was as bottomless as Val Katerina's, and who was her ally and sidekick. He crossed himself and walked away. He no longer felt like returning home, as it no longer represented a place of comfort for him. He gazed across the horizon toward the pine-clad mountainside, his eyes resting on the mountain chapel of Prophet Elijah. With a sense of resolve, he decided to leave the village behind and take the mountain trails toward their humble chapel. As a small child, while his parents were still alive, Christophoros fondly remembered walking these mountain trails many times to deliver oil, beeswax candles, artoclasia bread, and incense for the Vesper service during the feast of the prophet Elijah. In his teenage years, it took less than an hour to hike from Arbouna to the chapel. He fondly remembered attending divine liturgy, confessing his sins, and receiving Holy Communion in the humble and most abandoned chapel, which he visited throughout the years. The few times he visited this holy chapel, Christophoros sensed a special fragrance in the air, one that had nothing to do with the incense or the scent of cut flowers and blossoms. It was a fragrance that seemed to come from something beyond the physical, something divine. As he reminisced and savored these holy childhood memories, it didn't take long for Christophoros to reach the door of the prophet Elijah's chapel. He entered with deep reverence, crossing himself, and noticed a lit vigil oil lamp burning on the floor in the center of the iconostasi. He thought that perhaps a poor shepherd had it lit in the night before, so this humble house of the great Old Testament prophet would not be without light during the night. Christophoros lit a candle, knelt before the temple icons, and prayed fervently. Lord, you have forgiven so many sinners. Forgive me as well, your humble and unworthy servant, for the offense I committed against you this morning. In your house, O Lord, I cursed the woman who insulted me, and I beg your forgiveness. I ask you to chastise me as you see fit for this terrible offense. I also implore you, Lord, to forgive your servant Katerina for all her evil thoughts and for everything hurtful that comes from her mouth. Grant her your grace, Lord. Illumine her mind to find your way. Give peace to her troubled soul. Quench the thirst of her lips with your holy water and enrich her spirit with the spiritual treasures of your angels. Amen. He prayed extensively for Katerina, pouring out his heart with sincerity and humility. As he prayed, he felt a profound solace settle over his soul, and the heaviness that had burdened him since the morning began to dissipate. Peace replaced the turmoil within him, and he felt renewed strength in his spirit. Afterwards, he made his way to the chanter stand, lit a candle, and opened the psalter. With quiet reverence, he began to read Psalm 6. O Lord, do not rebuke me in your anger, nor chasten me in your wrath. After reciting Psalm 6, Christophoros immersed himself in prayer, reading aloud many other psalms he recalled from his childhood until now. He then recited the symbol of faith, the Creed. I believe in one God, the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, and of all things visible and invisible. Christophoros prostrated himself again before the icons, praying once more for Katerina's well-being. He asked God to soften her heart and bring her peace. Afterward, he stood, crossed himself, and kissed the icons. He then left the chapel of Prophet Elijah, ready to return to the village. The cold northern wind had nearly stopped, and the dawn painted the clear sky with beautiful rosy hues. The birds were chirping as Christophoros walked down the slope toward the mountain creek, the serene sounds of nature surrounding him. He stopped and knelt down to quench his thirst, having not eaten or drunk anything the day before. But as he cupped his hands to bring the precious liquid to his mouth, he trembled in shock. The creek had dried up completely, and before him lay only pebbles and sand. Just moments ago, the creek had been full of sparkling water racing down the mountainside, a true blessing from God in the early dawn. But now it had dried up completely. How could this happen so suddenly? And why had the sky darkened, with the birds no longer singing their spring songs? He realized that the earth had dried up under his very presence. The trees were withering, and the birds had lost their voice simply by his gaze. The cause of all this, he understood, was the heavy sin he had committed the day before inside the temple of God. Overcome by anger, he had cursed a creation of God, Katerina, a fellow human being, while standing under the flickering light of the vigil lamps and church icons. Hot tears began to run down his face, and everything around him turned pitch black. He fell to the ground, weeping deeply. Through his tears, he looked toward heaven and pleaded, "Lord, help me, your most sinful servant. Give me the strength to confess my sins to the spiritual Father and receive the discipline befitting this heavy crime. If this is your will, my Christ, grant me forgiveness of sins and allow me to partake in your immaculate body and blood. Please grant this miracle to your lowly servant, and I promise you at this very hour to renounce the life of this world and dedicate myself to your service." As soon as he spoke these words, the water began to flow downstream once again, sparkling as it raced over the rocks. The leaves on the trees glistened with renewed life, reflecting the warm light of the sun, and the birds resumed their joyful morning hymn, filling the air with their song. He crossed himself, glorified God for his infinite love, drank deeply from the refreshing stream, and then raced toward the village with renewed strength, his spirit soaring like the wings of an eagle.